The smell of burnt coffee and printer toner always reminded me why I hated visiting Jake at Hartwell and Associates. The sterile gray walls of the downtown Chicago office building seemed to close in on me as I walked through the maze of cubicles, carrying yet another stack of research materials my brother had somehow convinced me to compile for him. "Nick, there's my little junior assistant," Jake called out from his corner office, loud enough for half the floor to hear. I felt my cheeks burn as several heads turned our way, some colleagues offering polite smiles while others just stared. At 25, with my Northwestern marketing degree and 3 years of real-world experience at a growing startup, being called anyone's junior assistant stung more than Jake would ever understand. I pushed through the glass door of his office, setting the files down on his mahogany desk with more force than necessary. The October wind rattled the windows behind him, and I could see the Chicago River snaking through the city below. Sometimes I wondered what it would be like to work in a place like this, with actual resources and established clients, instead of the cramped converted warehouse where I currently spent my days. "You know, Jake, I'm not actually your assistant," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "I'm doing you a favor because Mom asked me to help with your Peterson Industries presentation." Jake barely looked up from his computer screen, his sandy brown hair falling across his forehead in that careless way that somehow always made him look effortlessly put together. He'd inherited Dad's height and natural confidence, while I got Mom's petite frame and her tendency to overthink everything. Right. Sorry, Nikki. You know I'm just messing with you." He finally glanced at the files I'd brought. "This is the consumer behavior analysis for Peterson's new product line. Complete demographic breakdown, competitor analysis, and 3 different campaign strategies," I replied, settling into the chair across from his desk. "The millennial engagement approach is particularly strong. I think if you position their eco-friendly packaging as a lifestyle choice, rather than just an environmental benefit, you'll see much better market penetration." For the first time that afternoon, Jake's attention was fully on me. He leaned forward, flipping through the pages I'd spent the past week crafting. The data was solid, the creative concepts were fresh, and I knew the strategy would work. I'd seen similar approaches succeed at TechFlow, the startup where I worked as their lead marketing strategist. "This is actually pretty good stuff," he said, and I hated how much his approval still meant to me. "Where did you get the idea for the social media integration?" "It's based on a campaign I ran last month for TechFlow's app launch. We saw a 40% increase in user engagement when we focused on lifestyle integration rather than product features." I pulled out my phone to show him the metrics. "The key is making the consumer feel like they're joining a community, not just buying a product." Jake nodded absently, already absorbed in the presentation slides I'd designed. I watched him mentally claim ownership of every idea, every strategy, every carefully crafted piece of copy. It was a dance we'd performed countless times over the years, from high school group projects to college presentations, where he'd somehow end up taking credit for my research. "You know what? This might actually save my career," he said with a laugh that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Peterson Industries has been our most demanding client, and honestly, I've been struggling to come up with something that would impress them." The admission surprised me. Jake rarely showed vulnerability, especially to his little sister. I studied his face, noticing the dark circles under his eyes and the tension in his shoulders. Maybe the pressure of working at a firm like Hartwell and Associates was getting to him more than he let on. "Are things really that tough here?" I asked. He shrugged, leaning back in his leather chair. "You have no idea, Nick. The competition is brutal. Everyone's fighting for the same promotions, the same big accounts. And if you lose a major client," he trailed off, but I could fill in the blanks. "In a place like this, failure wasn't just a setback. It was potentially career-ending." I felt a familiar pang of sympathy mixed with frustration. Despite everything, Jake was still my big brother, the one who taught me to ride a bike and defended me from playground bullies. But he was also the person who'd spent years treating my ambitions like cute hobbies, as if my marketing degree and professional experience were just elaborate games I was playing until I figured out what I really wanted to do with my life. "Maybe you should give me some credit in the presentation," I suggested, only half joking. "You know, mention that your sister contributed to the research." Jake's expression shifted back to that familiar, patronizing smile. "Come on, Nikki. This is a major corporate presentation. They're not interested in hearing about my kid sister's college projects." The words hit harder than they should have. College projects. As if everything I'd accomplished, every successful campaign I'd run, every client I'd helped grow, was just academic exercise. I stood up abruptly, the leather chair squeaking against the polished floor. "Those aren't college projects, Jake. That's real work for real clients with real budgets. Just because TechFlow isn't as big as Peterson Industries doesn't mean the strategies don't translate." "Hey, I didn't mean to offend you," he said, but his tone suggested he thought I was being overly sensitive. "I appreciate the help, I really do. And who knows? Maybe someday you'll work your way up to a place like this. Work my way up, as if I wasn't already working, already succeeding, already building something meaningful. I gathered my purse and jacket, suddenly desperate to get out of the suffocating atmosphere of corporate hierarchy and condescension. The presentation is on Friday, right? I asked, my hand on the door handle. Yeah, 2 o'clock. Why? Just curious. Good luck with it. I walked back through the maze of cubicles, past the water cooler conversations and the endless clicking of keyboards, feeling more determined than ever to prove that I was more than just Jake's junior assistant. I had no idea that within a week, everything would change in ways neither of us could have predicted. The TechFlow office buzzed with its usual chaotic energy as I walked in Monday morning, still thinking about my frustrating encounter with Jake. Our converted warehouse space in River North couldn't have been more different from Hartwell & Associates' polished corporate environment. Exposed brick walls, mismatched furniture, and the constant hum of creativity made it feel more like a startup incubator than a traditional office. "Nick, perfect timing," called out Marcus Chen, our CEO, as he approached my desk with his usual coffee-stained enthusiasm. At 32, Marcus had already built and sold one company, and his infectious energy was part of what made working at TechFlow so different from the corporate world my brother inhabited. "Please tell me you're not about to dump another impossible deadline on me," I said, settling into my desk chair and pulling up my email. The morning light streaming through the tall windows cast geometric shadows across my workspace, where I'd taped up mood boards for 3 different client campaigns. Actually, quite the opposite. Marcus perched on the edge of my desk, his expression unusually serious. "I got a call this weekend from Rebecca Hartwell. You know, from Hartwell & Associates?" My coffee mug froze halfway to my lips. "Rebecca Hartwell? As in the CEO of where my brother works? Your brother works there?" Marcus looked genuinely surprised. Small world. "Anyway, she heard about our Peterson Industries competitor analysis through some industry connections, and she wants to meet with you." I set down my coffee carefully, my mind racing. Meet with me about what? Apparently, there's been some drama over there. Their creative director just jumped ship to go work for Peterson's biggest competitor, and he took half the creative team with him. Rebecca's looking for fresh talent to shake things up. The irony wasn't lost on me. While Jake was using my work to save his career, the CEO of his company was reaching out to me directly. I thought about his dismissive comments about my college projects and felt a familiar spark of determination. "When does she want to meet?" I asked. "This afternoon, actually. She's moving fast on this." Marcus studied my face. "You interested? I mean, I'd hate to lose you, but this could be a huge opportunity." I spent the morning in a strange state of distraction, fielding calls from clients while my mind kept drifting to what a meeting with Rebecca Hartwell might mean. TechFlow had been good to me, but I couldn't deny that the resources and prestige of a company like Hartwell & Associates were appealing. More importantly, the idea of proving myself in Jake's world, on his turf, felt like exactly the challenge I needed. At 2 o'clock, I found myself back in the elevator of the downtown office building, but this time heading to the executive floor. Rebecca Hartwell's office was everything I'd expected. Floor-to-ceiling windows, modern art, and furniture that probably cost more than my annual salary. But Rebecca herself was surprisingly approachable, a woman in her 50s with silver hair and sharp blue eyes that seemed to see right through any pretense. "Nick, thank you for coming on such short notice," she said, gesturing for me to sit in one of the leather chairs across from her desk. "I've been hearing impressive things about your work." "From who, if you don't mind me asking?" "David Park, from Peterson Industries. He mentioned your name specifically when discussing some innovative approaches he'd seen recently." Rebecca leaned forward, her expression intense. He was particularly impressed with a demographic analysis and social media integration strategy that apparently came from TechFlow. My heart sank. David Park was Jake's contact at Peterson Industries, which meant he'd seen my work in Jake's presentation. Once again, my brother was taking credit for my ideas, but this time it had led to an unexpected opportunity. "I'm flattered, but I should clarify something," I began, but Rebecca held up a hand. "Before you say anything, let me explain the situation. Hartwell & Associates is at a crossroads. We've been successful for decades, but the market is changing faster than we've been able to adapt. We need someone who understands both traditional marketing principles and digital innovation, someone who can bridge the gap between established practices and emerging trends." She stood and walked to the window, looking out over the city. Our creative director's departure wasn't just about money. He felt constrained by our traditional approach, and frankly, he was right. We need to evolve, and we need someone who can lead that evolution. "And you think I'm that person?" I asked, trying to keep the disbelief out of my voice. "I think you're worth finding out about." Rebecca turned back to me. "I'm creating a new position, Creative Director of Digital Innovation. It would report directly to me, and you'd have full authority over campaign strategy for our digital-focused clients. The starting salary is $85,000, plus bonuses based on client retention and new business development. The number hit me like a physical blow. I was making $48,000 at TechFlow, and while I loved the work, the financial security of nearly doubling my income was undeniable. But more than that, this was the chance to prove myself in a way that Jake would have to acknowledge. I appreciate the offer, but I'm curious. Do you know that my brother Jake works here? Rebecca's eyebrows rose slightly. Jake Williams is your brother? He's in our mid-management tier, isn't he? Consumer goods division? The casual way she described Jake's position, something he'd worked 5 years to achieve, put everything in perspective. In this world, he was just another middle manager, while I was being offered a director-level position that would put me several rungs above him on the corporate ladder. This position would involve overseeing digital strategy across all divisions, Rebecca continued, including consumer goods. You'd be working with team leaders like your brother to ensure our campaigns are cohesive and innovative. Working with team leaders like your brother. The phrase echoed in my mind as I realized what she was really saying. I would be Jake's superior, his boss, the person he'd have to report to for approval on the very campaigns I'd been helping him develop. I'll need to give TechFlow 2 weeks' notice, I said, surprising myself with how quickly I'd made the decision. Of course, but I'd like you to start attending our senior staff meetings immediately, just as an observer. We have one tomorrow morning at 9, and I think it would be helpful for you to get a feel for how we operate. As I rode the elevator back down to the lobby, my phone buzzed with a text from Jake. Killed it with the Peterson presentation. Your research really helped. Thanks again, junior assistant. I stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back. Glad I could help. See you soon. He had no idea just how soon that would be, or how dramatically our relationship was about to change. For the first time in years, I felt like I was finally about to step out of my brother's shadow and into my own light. The Chicago wind whipped through the downtown streets as I walked back to my car, but I barely felt the cold. Tomorrow I'd be sitting in a boardroom as the newest director at Hartwell & Associates, while Jake remained oblivious to the fact that his junior assistant was about to become his boss. The Hartwell & Associates boardroom felt different at 9 in the morning than it had during my interview. The early sunlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows cast long shadows across the polished mahogany table, where 15 senior staff members were gathering for the weekly strategy meeting. I sat quietly in the observer chair Rebecca had arranged for me, watching the corporate hierarchy play out in real time. Division heads filed in with their coffee and tablets, each claiming their usual spots around the table. I recognized some faces from my visit to Jake's office, but from this vantage point they looked different, more formal, more guarded. The easy camaraderie I'd observed in the cubicle areas was replaced by the careful politeness of people protecting their territories. Before we begin, Rebecca announced from the head of the table, I'd like to introduce Nick Williams, our new creative director of digital innovation. She'll be observing today to get familiar with our processes. A polite murmur of welcome circled the room, and I nodded acknowledgement, hyper-aware of every face turning toward me. What they didn't know, what none of them could know, was that I was seeing their world through completely new eyes, armed with insider knowledge from months of helping Jake navigate these same corporate waters. Let's start with the consumer goods division, Rebecca continued. Jake, how did the Peterson Industries presentation go? My heart stopped. I turned toward the familiar voice before I could stop myself, and there was Jake, sitting halfway down the table with a stack of papers that I instantly recognized as my own work. His face had gone completely white, his mouth opening and closing soundlessly as he stared at me. Jake? Rebecca prompted, glancing between us with growing curiosity. The presentation went well, he managed, his voice barely above a whisper. Very well. Peterson Industries was impressed with our innovative approach to their demographic challenges. I watched my brother struggle to form coherent sentences while the rest of the room waited patiently. The confident middle manager who'd dismissed me as his junior assistant just days earlier was now fumbling through what should have been his moment of triumph. That's excellent news, Rebecca said. I understand the strategy included some cutting-edge digital integration concepts. Walk us through your approach. This was the moment I'd been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. Jake's eyes darted to me, then back to his papers, then to Rebecca. He was trapped between taking credit for work he hadn't done and admitting he'd had help, all while processing the impossible reality of seeing his little sister sitting in a senior staff meeting. The approach focused on lifestyle integration rather than product features, he began, his voice gaining strength as he fell into familiar territory. We positioned their eco-friendly packaging as a community membership, rather than just an environmental benefit. I had to give him credit. He'd absorbed the strategy well enough to present it coherently, but I could see the sweat beading on his forehead as he continued, and I knew he was terrified of follow-up questions that might expose the gaps in his understanding. "Interesting," said Patricia Wong, the head of digital marketing. "How did you measure the potential ROI on the social media integration?" Jake's pause stretched a beat too long. We used comparative analysis from similar campaigns to project engagement rates and conversion metrics." It was the right answer, but delivered with the uncertainty of someone repeating information rather than explaining their own work. I found myself leaning forward, fighting the urge to jump in and explain the detailed methodology I'd used to calculate those projections. "I'm curious about the demographic breakdown," added Michael Torres from the research department. "What was your primary data source for the millennial engagement patterns?" Another pause. Longer this time. Jake shuffled through his papers, clearly looking for information that wasn't there. I used a combination of industry reports and proprietary research to develop the consumer profiles." "Proprietary research?" Rebecca's eyebrows raised slightly. "From which source?" The room fell silent. I could practically hear Jake's heart pounding from across the table. This was the moment where his lack of involvement in the actual work would become impossible to hide, and I found myself facing an unexpected choice. I could sit quietly and watch him struggle, or I could throw him a lifeline that might compromise my own position. "If I may," I said, my voice cutting through the tension. "I believe the proprietary research came from TechFlow's recent app launch campaign. The demographic data from that project showed similar patterns to what Peterson Industries was targeting." Rebecca's eyes sharpened with interest. "You're familiar with that research?" "I am. I actually ran that campaign at TechFlow before joining Hartwell and Associates." I met Jake's grateful gaze across the table. The conversion metrics were particularly relevant to Peterson's target demographic. The room buzzed with quiet interest. I'd just revealed my connection to the work without explicitly undermining Jake, but I could see the wheels turning in Rebecca's mind. She was too smart not to piece together the implications. "That's fascinating," she said slowly. "Jake, how did you become aware of the TechFlow data?" Another impossible question. Jake opened his mouth, then closed it, his face cycling through a rainbow of emotions. Fear, gratitude, confusion, and something that might have been pride all flickered across his features as he struggled to respond. Nick is my sister," he said finally, his voice barely audible. "She helped me with the research." The admission hung in the air like a confession. I watched the faces around the table process this information, saw the moment when several people began to understand the true source of Jake's suddenly innovative approach. "I see," Rebecca said, her tone carefully neutral. "Well, regardless of the source, the Peterson Industries presentation was clearly successful. Jake, congratulations on securing their continued business." The meeting continued with reports from other divisions, but I barely heard them. I was too focused on the man sitting across from me, watching him struggle with the realization that his little sister was now sitting in a boardroom where he'd never been invited, holding a position he'd never been offered, discussing work that he'd never been capable of producing on his own. When the meeting ended, Jake lingered while the others filed out. I could see him wanting to approach me, but Rebecca's presence made it impossible. She walked over to where I was gathering my things, her expression thoughtful. "Interesting family dynamic," she said quietly. "I'm beginning to understand why your name came up in connection with Peterson Industries." I met her gaze steadily. "I believe in helping family when I can." "Indeed." She paused, studying me. "Jake seems like a dedicated employee, but I get the impression that your contributions to his recent success were more substantial than he initially indicated. There was no point in denying it. He's my brother. I wanted to see him succeed. And now?" I looked across the room where Jake stood frozen by the door, clearly waiting for everyone else to leave so he could confront me. "Now I think it's time for me to focus on my own success." Rebecca nodded approvingly. "I think that's very wise. I'll see you tomorrow for your first official day." As she left, I was finally alone with Jake. He approached me slowly, like someone walking toward a car accident they couldn't quite believe had happened. "Nick," he said, his voice hollow. "What the hell is going on?" The empty boardroom felt cavernous with just the two of us standing there, the weight of years of family history pressing down on the polished mahogany table between us. Jake looked like he'd aged 5 years in the past hour, his carefully styled hair disheveled from running his hands through it during the meeting. "You're my boss," he said, the words coming out flat and disbelieving. "My little sister is my boss." I'd imagined this moment dozens of times over the past day, but none of my mental rehearsals had prepared me for the raw vulnerability in his voice. This wasn't the confident big brother who'd dismissed my ambitions or the corporate climber who'd taken credit for my work. This was someone whose entire worldview had just been turned upside down. I'm the creative director of digital innovation, I said carefully, which means I'll be overseeing digital strategy across all divisions, including consumer goods. Jesus Christ, Nick. He slumped into one of the leather chairs, his head in his hands. How long have you been planning this? Planning what? I got the job offer yesterday. I literally found out about it the same day I decided to take it. I remained standing, needing the physical advantage of looking down at him. Rebecca Hartwell called TechFlow because she heard about innovative work coming from there, work that had been used in a presentation to Peterson Industries. The implication hung between us. Jake looked up, his eyes wide with understanding. She knows, doesn't she? She knows you did the work. She's figuring it out. I moved to the window, looking out over the Chicago skyline. But honestly, Jake, that's not my biggest concern right now. My biggest concern is figuring out how to do this job without our family relationship undermining my authority. Your authority? He let out a bitter laugh. 3 days ago, you were helping me with my homework, and now you're talking about authority? The dismissive tone was back, and I felt my patience snap. It wasn't homework, Jake. It was your job. A job you couldn't do without help from your little sister, who apparently isn't qualified to work at a place like this. That's not what I meant. That's exactly what you meant. I turned back to face him. You've spent years treating my career like a cute phase I was going through. Every time I achieved something, you found a way to diminish it. When I got my first client at TechFlow, you said it was just a small startup. When I increased their revenue by 40%, you said anyone could do that with a company that size. When I developed the strategy that saved your Peterson Industries presentation, you introduced me to your colleagues as your junior assistant. Jake's face flushed. You never meant to what? Hurt my feelings? Undermine my confidence? Take credit for my work? I sat down across from him, finally letting some of the frustration I'd been carrying show. Or did you never mean to get caught? The silence stretched between us, broken only by the distant hum of traffic from the street below. I could see Jake processing not just the immediate situation, but years of interactions he'd probably never examined closely. I'm sorry, he said finally. I didn't realize how much my comments were affecting you. They weren't just comments, Jake. They were constant reminders that you saw me as less capable, less professional, less worthy of respect than you were. I leaned forward. Do you know what it's like to spend 3 years building a successful career, only to have your own brother treat you like you're playing dress-up? I didn't think you were playing dress-up. Then why did you never take me seriously? Why did you assume I could never work at a company like this when I've been doing the same work, just at a smaller scale? Jake was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. Because you're my little sister, he said finally. In my head, you're still the kid who needed help reaching the top shelf. When you talk about strategy and demographics and ROI, part of me still sees the teenager who used to help with my college projects. I'm 25, Jake. I have my own apartment, my own career, my own life. I've been trying to show you that I'm capable of more than you give me credit for. But you keep seeing what you want to see. And now you're my boss. Now I'm your boss. I let the words settle. Which means we need to figure out how to make this work professionally, regardless of what happens personally. Jake looked up at me, and for the first time in years, I saw something like respect in his eyes. What do you need from me? The question caught me off guard. I'd been prepared for anger, denial, or manipulation, but not genuine cooperation. I need you to do your job without expecting special treatment because we're family. I need you to stop taking credit for work you didn't do. And I need you to start treating me like the professional I've always been. And if I can't, then you'll have to decide whether your pride is more important than your career. I stood up, gathering my things. Because I'm not going anywhere, Jake. I've worked too hard to get here to let family dynamics derail my success. As I walked toward the door, Jake called out, Nick? I turned back. For what it's worth, I'm proud of you. I should have said that a long time ago. The admission hit me harder than I expected. This was what I'd been wanting to hear for years, but it was coming at a moment when the cost of getting it felt almost too high. Thank you. Are you going to tell Mom and Dad about this? I paused at the door. I think that should come from both of us. Together, like adults. Walking back to the elevator, I felt the weight of what I'd just committed to. In the span of 2 days, I'd gone from being Jake's unappreciated little sister to his professional superior. The satisfaction I'd expected to feel was complicated by the genuine pain I'd seen in his eyes, and the realization that proving myself might cost me the relationship I'd been trying to improve all along. But as the elevator descended toward the lobby, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was exactly where I was supposed to be. For the first time in my life, I wasn't standing in Jake's shadow or trying to catch up to his achievements. I was standing on my own, in my own light, ready to prove that I belonged here not because of family connections, but because I'd earned it. The real test would come tomorrow, when I'd have to start being the creative director of digital innovation without the safety net of being Jake's little sister. But for now, I was ready to find out who I could become when nobody was holding me back. 3 weeks later, I was standing in what had become my office, watching the Chicago skyline disappear behind a wall of November snow. The nameplate on my door read, Nick Williams, Creative Director of Digital Innovation, and I still felt a small thrill every time I saw it. The office itself was everything I'd dreamed of during those cramped days at TechFlow. Floor-to-ceiling windows, a view of the river, and enough space for the creativity boards I'd covered with strategy maps for 5 different client campaigns. My computer chimed with a new email from Rebecca. Exceptional work on the Morrison Hotels campaign. Client wants to extend the contract and specifically requested your team for their spring launch. Well done. I smiled, saving the message to my growing folder of positive feedback. The past 3 weeks had been a whirlwind of 14-hour days, client meetings, and the constant pressure of proving that Rebecca's faith in me hadn't been misplaced. But it was working. The digital strategies I'd developed were generating real results, and more importantly, they were changing how Hartwell & Associates approached client relationships. A soft knock on my door interrupted my thoughts. Come in. Jake entered, carrying a folder and wearing an expression I'd learned to recognize as his professional face. The careful neutrality he maintained whenever we worked together now. The transformation in our relationship had been remarkable to watch. Gone were the casual dismissals and condescending comments. In their place was a formal respect that felt both refreshing and slightly sad. I have the revised Peterson Industries proposal, he said, setting the folder on my desk. I incorporated the feedback from your review and expanded the social media integration component. I flipped through the pages, noting the improvements he'd made. Jake had always been good at his job, but working under my oversight had forced him to elevate his game. The proposal was thorough, creative, and showed a deep understanding of digital marketing principles that hadn't been there a month ago. This is excellent work, I said, and meant it. The influencer partnership strategy is particularly strong. How did you identify these potential collaborators? I used the demographic analysis tools you recommended and cross-referenced them with engagement metrics from similar campaigns. He paused, then added, I also consulted with Sarah from the digital team. She had some insights about micro-influencers that I hadn't considered. The fact that he'd sought help from a colleague rather than trying to handle everything himself was another sign of how much had changed. The old Jake would have struggled alone rather than admit he needed assistance. Good instincts, I said, signing off on the proposal. I think Peterson Industries will be very happy with this. Thanks. He hesitated at the door. Nick, I wanted to let you know that I got approached by a headhunter yesterday for a senior position at Morrison & Associates. My heart jumped. Morrison & Associates was one of our biggest competitors, and losing Jake would be a significant blow to the consumer goods division. But more than that, the thought of him leaving felt like unfinished business between us. Are you interested? I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. I don't know. The money would be better, and honestly, the situation here is... He trailed off, gesturing vaguely at the space between us. Complicated? Yeah. He sat down in the chair across from my desk, dropping his professional facade for the first time in weeks. I keep waiting for this to feel normal, but it doesn't. Every time I come to you for approval or feedback, there's this voice in my head reminding me that you're my little sister. I set down my pen and looked at him directly. And how does that make you feel? Proud, mostly, which is weird because I thought I'd feel embarrassed or resentful. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I recognized from childhood. But watching you in action these past few weeks, seeing how you handle clients and strategy sessions, I keep thinking about how I underestimated you for so long. You did underestimate me, for years. I know, and I'm sorry for that. But I also realize now that part of my resistance came from being afraid that you were better at this than I was. He met my eyes. Turns out I was right to be afraid. The admission hung in the air between us. I thought about all the times I'd wanted to hear something like this from him, and how strange it felt to receive it now, when our relationship had been forever changed by the reversal of our roles. You're not a bad marketer, Jake. You're actually quite good when you stop trying to do everything yourself. But I'm not as good as you. We're different kinds of good. You understand client relationships in a way that I'm still learning. You're better at reading room dynamics and managing up, but I'm better at seeing the big picture and connecting digital strategies to business outcomes. He nodded slowly. So, what happens now? Do I take the job at Morrison & Associates and we go back to being normal siblings who don't work together? The question I'd been dreading. Is that what you want? I don't know. Part of me thinks it would be easier. But another part of me thinks I might be running away from something that could actually make me better at my job. I leaned back in my chair, considering, what if we tried something different? What if instead of you reporting to me directly, we restructured your role to focus on client relationship management while I handle strategy development? We'd be collaborating instead of you working under me. His eyebrows rose. You'd do that? I'd propose it to Rebecca. You're good at what you do, Jake. And I don't want to lose you as a colleague just because we're still figuring out how to be siblings who work together. For the first time in weeks, he smiled the genuine smile I remembered from before everything got complicated. You know what Mom's going to say when we tell her about all this. I told you so. Exactly. She always said you'd be running things someday. I laughed, remembering our mother's predictions about my future and how confidently she'd dismissed Jake's concerns about my unrealistic career goals. She's going to be insufferable about being right. She deserves to be. Jake stood up, his posture more relaxed than I'd seen it in weeks. I'll think about the Morrison offer, but I'd like to hear Rebecca's thoughts about the restructuring idea first. After he left, I turned back to the window, watching the snow fall over the city. 3 weeks ago, I'd been afraid that proving myself professionally would cost me my relationship with my brother. Instead, it had forced both of us to grow into better versions of ourselves. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus at TechFlow. How's corporate life treating you? We miss your chaos energy over here. I typed back, learning that some chaos is exactly what this place needed. Thanks for everything. The response came immediately. Anytime. And Nick? I always knew you'd end up running the show somewhere. I smiled, saving the message. It was nice to hear from people who'd believed in me before I'd had to prove myself to anyone else. But more than that, it was a reminder that the journey to this office hadn't started with Jake's dismissiveness or ended with his acceptance. It had started with my own determination to be more than what anyone expected, and it would continue with whatever challenges came next. The snow was falling harder now, blanketing the city in white. Tomorrow, I had a presentation to the board about expanding our digital services division. Next week, I'd be flying to New York to pitch a potential client who'd specifically requested the innovative young director they'd heard about. And somewhere in between, I'd figure out how to balance being Jake's sister with being his colleague, and how to keep growing into the person I'd always known I could become. I wasn't Jake's junior assistant anymore. I wasn't anyone's junior assistant. I was exactly where I belonged, doing exactly what I was meant to do, and that felt like the most satisfying victory of all.